This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as tax, accounting, financial, or legal advice. Okay, let's go. Welcome, everybody, to the Sandwich Bread Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Kaminsky. On the Sandwich Bread Podcast, we have conversations about life and money for the sandwich generation. And I'm super excited to have on today's featured guest, Scott Leek. Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm great. How you doing, Tom?
Good. I'm doing great. Scott, first of all, what is your title? I was toying with that in the prep for the show, but it seems to be growing with each passing day. So what would be your current title for FP transition?
I tell people I have the same title as Chandler Bing, so you can call me a transponster. But no, my official title at FP Transitions is Director of Business Development, and I am now also the interim director of our EMS team, our Equity Management Solution Group. So been there for about 5 years. Actually, just had my 5-year anniversary.
5 years. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Time flies. For the sake of transparency for the audience, I worked under Scott for a number of years at TD Ameritrade Institutional, a wonderful company. We both RIP TD Ameritrade and TD Ameritrade Institutional. But Scott was an awesome leader there. And I, for a while, wanted to have Scott on the show because he has a really unique perspective that I think translates really well to a broader audience. He's spent almost 30 years in our space. Is that right? 30? Wasn't it on 30?
It's really fun when my teenage daughter's around to tell them I started in the financial services industry in the 1900s.
So Scott he invented financial services
right.
in the 1900s, but he spent 30 years, really around 30 years in the financial advisory space, working at TD Ameritrade, helping launch their advisor services team, counseling hundreds and hundreds of independent financial advisors over those years, probably thousands. And for the sake of the broader audience, they're really, all those independent financial advisors are small business owners. And a lot
Absolutely.
of them deny that and live their lives accordingly.
Some of them are accidental business owners. We can talk
Yes.
about that a little bit.
Love that. Yep. And so Scott had consulted to them for years, decades. And with his latest transition over to FP transition, he's now really narrowly focused on business succession, business valuation, and practice management for independent advisors. Whereas his responsibilities at TD Ameritrade Institutional were more specifically tied to the custody component of the business. And so Scott, like myself, is a certified financial planner, CFP professional, which is a designation I often bring up on this show and hold in high regard. But Scott, also like myself, loves to learn and loves to continue personal growth. And he actually obtained the Certified Exit Planning Advisor designation in addition to his CFP. And I believe you did that after joining FP. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just did that beginning of last year, and I got a lot out of that program. I mean, one of the really interesting things I learned from it is there are 8 ways small business owners in the U.S. can exit their businesses. And I would have guessed 2. So there's a lot I got out of that program, and really how do I play a good role in helping small business owners in this country, specifically in my world of financial services, but how do I help small business owners be intentional about the future, their business, their legacy, and how do they ultimately take care of their family, their clients, and harvest the value of the equity they've built in the business?
Yeah. It was a fascinating component. When I sat on your side of the fence, it would be really interesting to see financial advisory practices where the actual value of the business represented a huge chunk of the net worth of the financial planner owned the business. And their whole career, they spend counseling people on diversification and savings and carefully planning out their future. And then they get to their own retirement and they literally have all their assets in their business that they have to sell.
Yeah, it's kind of like working with a doctor who smokes in a way. It's like, wait a minute. You told me not to do this, and now here you are doing it.
Awesome. I'm glad to have you on today, Scott. Our audience for this podcast is mostly comprised of sandwich generation individuals, not financial professionals. So we're bringing you on to share more universal truths for the small business owner listeners that might be out there about why you want to consider business succession, business continuity planning. And so with that, you want to dive into today's podcast?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. So question number 1 for you, Scott. Why should somebody consider putting a business succession or business continuity plan in place? They're a small business owner. They're extremely busy. They might be growing. They might have employees to care for. It's just, why should they even take that step?
Well, let's even take a step back from that, and I want to make sure that we're using the same vocabulary for everybody. So, on the one hand, there's continuity planning. On the other hand, there's succession planning, and there is a distinction between the two. And
Yeah.
different people define them differently. But for the purposes of today's discussion, let's refer to continuity planning as having a plan in place in the event of unintentional exit. Death, disability is usually what happens in those cases. Whereas succession planning, we're generally talking about a planned exit on your own terms. Let's call it retirement. So it's important to have both of those plans. But if you had to say there's one that's vital to any business, it's the continuity plan. And so really what that's doing is putting something in place. And I want to be clear too, a plan needs to be written. So having a verbal agreement with somebody, okay, it's better than nothing. But these things, when we're talking about small businesses that can be worth millions of dollars, you're very likely going to be looking at a court case if you've got things that are not properly documented in written form. So what we want to do is encourage people to have something written in place that simply says, in the event of my death or disability, this is what's going to happen to the business. And so you have a lot of stakeholders in any small business, and we're making sure they're all taken care of. So the owner, first and foremost, is being taken care of, or at least their estate is being taken care of, because you're coming to a predetermined, essentially, M&A transaction. So you're agreeing that somebody's going to come in and buy the business and take it over in the event of your death. So your family, your estate is still getting value for what you've built, even though you might not think like, I want to get rid of it now. It has some value even before you get to that end goal. If you had that, you get hit by the proverbial bus, it's something in place that says my family's going to get taken care of for this value. The next thing is you're going to make sure that if there's any employees, that they're taken care of too. So you have somebody comes in who is now owner of the business, like making sure that everyone's going to get their paycheck next Friday, and that they've got jobs. So you're looking out for the staff. And then ultimately you want to make sure that the clients of the business are being taken care of as well. Like, small example of this, but like I remember when my dentist retired and I did not get, I don't know if he sold, I don't know what happened. I don't know if he sold the business. I don't know if he had a successor. I just called one day and like phone was disconnected and I didn't have a dentist anymore. And it's like, I don't want to
And you've
find a
since
new.
lost 3 or 4 teeth in the
Oh my God. I mean, I hate the fact that I have to go and like find a new dentist. So it's a nice kind of last thing you do for your clients of making sure that they're taken care of in the event anything happens to you. And particularly like for someone like you, Tom, who legally has a fiduciary duty to put your client's interest ahead of your own.
Yep.
That's something that I really tout to our clients in financial services, at least, that if you're a small business owner, you have a fiduciary duty to your clients. And I think making sure that they don't have to go shop for another advisor because something happened to you is part of that duty.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can speak to that a little bit. When I launched my business, officially Twin Robins was launched roughly 2 years ago, I had an immediate continuity plan in place, but I was launching a business essentially from scratch. And so the initial continuity plan was basically to coordinate working with my wife and take over my client relationships. And here's the path that I want you to follow. A lot has changed in 2 years' time. And I've gone through a much more rigorous process of developing a detailed continuity plan with the involvement of attorneys and insurance agents. And basically, there's just a lot more complexity to the process. And I'm a relatively small and simple business, but you get in the weeds on it, it's not simple. And as the business continues to grow, thankfully, we've had enormous and wonderful growth over these last 2 years. The needs and the continuity plan is going to immediately evolve. Like as we're drafting the plan, I'm already looking at it going, in 12 months, this clause is going to have to change.
And keep doing it over time. Like it's not a one-time event. So I think that's an important point too, is, when we draft continuity plan documents for our clients, we put a 2-year expiration on them.
Yeah.
And, simple 1-page form to renew it, but it forces them every 2 years to go, is this still the continuity partner that I want buying my business if something happened to me? I mean, what happens if something happened to them? What happens if they retired? And making sure that the value of it is still accurately described, because a lot of times these plans can get very specific down to the dollar amount. Again, you're sometimes pre-negotiating an M&A transaction.
Yeah.
And so you could get very specific. You can say, well, I'm going to buy the business for a multiple of the revenue of the business. So if the business generates $1 million a year in revenue, you can say, well, whatever the revenue was for the trailing 12 months, they're going to buy it for 1.5 times revenue or 2 times revenue or whatever the multiple is that you need to figure out in your industry makes the most sense.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It requires flexibility, but specificity at the same time. And that can be very difficult. And I think to your point, renewing at least every 2 years, renewing the whole process, evaluating, reading every document is fairly essential.
Right.
So
Now, and in your case, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but
yep.
the person who you have in place or the company you have in place on the other side of your continuity plan, your business is going to be worth 7 figures when you pass away. If, let's just assume you're going to pass away at some point in time. I don't think you're immortal
I'm
as
going to
much as
fight
you
the
seem
good
to be.
fight. I'm going to fight the good fight.
So whenever that moment comes for you, it's a substantial amount of money, and you don't necessarily want to expect that individual or that company to just have that on hand to be able to
Right.
fork it over to pay your estate. And so one of the nice kind of tricks you can do is that whatever that amount is you've agreed to, the person on the buy side buys a life insurance policy
Yep.
on you, and those premium payments should be not that big of a deal. But in the event of your death or disability, all of a sudden, boom, they've got $1 million in cash because of that life insurance policy. And they just had to pay, a couple $100 a month or less just to make sure that they could do that. So there's a way to make it really, really affordable for all parties.
Yep.
But the trick is, if you do it as a snapshot in time and you're going to say in your contracts, like, well, we're going to buy the company for $2 million. Like, okay, well, 2 years from now, is it going to be worth 3 million? Is it going to be worth 3.5 million? So you might want to have to check that value every so often and up the value of those insurance policies if those are involved.
Yeah. And an added wrinkle for folks like us that are doing brain work is disability. You could get in a serious accident, not be dead, and have a business that needs your brain, to continue to sustain itself.
And I hate to say it, but statistically at age 41, that's more likely than your premature death.
Absolutely. Far more likely. And so we had to, just like when I evaluate my client's own personal financial planning needs, I had to account for both death and some form of disability. Then we had to get in the weeds on defining disability, right? Because
Right.
I might proudly say I am not disabled. My brain works just as good, but not be in a position of capacity where I can actually make that call. And so we have in the agreement built out definitions of disability and when that payment, because then I would receive disability insurance versus life insurance, when that would kick in,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the further we got, the more wrinkles emerged.
Yeah. And that's why it's good to go through this with the help of somebody in your industry, whatever your industry is. There's got to be somebody in your industry that's equivalent of what FP Transitions is for financial services that can help with, making sure those things are right. Just because you know someone who's an attorney doesn't mean they're the right person to help draft legal documents for this. Like, you wouldn't want somebody who's one of the injury attorneys you see on the billboards on the highway. Like, that's not the person to call to help with this.
Right. Yep. So let's then transition into taking those first steps. I think we've done a good job framing, the pros and cons of making the decision to at least get a business continuity plan in place. But maybe it's time to get serious about what's next for the business, put a succession plan in place. Daunting, right? What are those first pieces that people should put in place to begin the journey of developing their succession plan?
Well, I want to address both of them. I'll focus more on succession, but I think one of the first places to start is, well, who is my plan partner going to be? So whether it's continuity, whether it's succession, you got to start with, who do you trust? Who do you want to even approach to have this conversation with? And on the continuity side, it can be somebody internal to the business right now that is one of your employees.
Yeah.
It could be an outside company that is, for all intents and purposes, a competitor. Either one works. And there's pros and cons to each, and we could probably do a 2-parter on all of this. But I think if you're thinking long-term succession, building that legacy, the company name, and the way everything's done, the culture survives, it has to be an internal person. And one of the really important things you need to ask yourself before you broach this with that individual is, do they have the will and do they have the skill to be a business owner themselves? One of those can be overcome, one of them cannot. So, and that's all the more reason to start early. If they have the will, if they're interested and they're driven to have the roles and responsibilities and the rewards of being an owner, great. You can teach them the skills. Again, the earlier you start, the more you can train them up and help them understand, even if they only own 5 or 10% of the company, what does it mean to be an owner? What are these responsibilities we have to do now? How is this so different than just being an employee? How do we work as partners? Now, the nice thing is, if you're the primary owner and you sell someone 10% of the company, well, guess what? You outvote them on everything. So you still have total control over the company. And with properly documented paperwork on this, you create kind of that continuity plan within your corporate governance document. So you might be structured as an LLC, you're structured as an S Corp, and a good attorney is going to help you structure what is the agreement if anything happens to one of the two shareholders or one of the two members of the LLC. So that gets baked into your corporate governance documents. It doesn't have to be a separate document anymore. But that's something that you're going to want to think about of, well, what happens if my successor, who let's say for now is just owning 10% of the company, what happens if 5 years into it, they're like, I don't like being an owner? What's the formula for them selling back their shares to you? Can they sell them to anyone they want? Do they have to sell it back to you? Those are all the types of things that a good attorney, like someone who kind of specializes in labor law and corporations, that's someone who's going to help you figure out what are all the right terms and conditions to put in those documents. But again, start early, identify who's a really good fit. If they don't have the will, that's not something you can change. If they don't have the skill, that's something that you can coach them up and get them to be just like you. Just because they're not seemingly an entrepreneur right off the bat, well, you might not have been at the same age either. And you don't have to replace yourself. You can replace yourself in multitudes. So we really recommend people bring in multiple new owners, particularly as the business is getting really valuable. The way you get someone to afford 5, 10% of the company is you sell it to 2 or 3 or 4 employees, and collectively they need to be able to replace you. They don't have to replace you in each individual person.
Awesome. Really good. Okay. This is awesome stuff. We'll obviously link in the show notes to everything we've discussed and kind of frame these ideas up and put them in a couple of actionable steps for you guys, the listeners. Let's talk for a few minutes before we wrap about pitfalls. Can you share a few pitfalls that you see when you're consulting to business owners? Let's just pick the top 2 or 3 because this could be.
Yeah. I mean, again, the biggest one, I said it early, it has to be written. So a verbal agreement, a handshake, it's not enough. It's better than nothing, but it's not enough. So
Barely.
Having it well written, and Tom, you brought up a really, really important point too, that I think a lot of people miss, is when you're doing something like disability, making sure disability is defined, because you can have that situation. And we've had it come up with people that have called us and asked for our help on these things, where we've got founder and they have had the second generation owner coming in as well. The second generation is the continuity plan. Owner has a stroke. The second generation owner, we call him G2s. G2 is saying he is not able to continue to serve clients anymore. And the founder's going, yes, I am. Well, how do we determine this? Well, we have clearly defined in our continuity plan, this, and this are the criteria for disability. Does he meet those criteria or not? It is completely objective. There's no subjectivity to it. It could be something as simple as we need 2 doctors to sign off that he's disabled. You find 2 doctors that agree, then okay, you're done. So however you want to define it needs to be defined. That's one of the things that can really end you up in court.
Great. All right, cool. What else? What other? Come on, you got to have some more war stories.
Oh, I've got plenty of war stories. I mean, and yeah, I mean, we get calls all the time from firms where maybe there's a G1, there's a G2, and they haven't put anything in writing yet. And something happens to the G1 and the G2 saying, okay, well, to the widow, I'll give you this much money for it and I'll take it over. And in our case, in this one particular client case, the widow's like, well, but the valuation said it was worth this. And it's like, well, that's what it was worth when Mike was alive. And it's not worth that because he's not alive anymore. He had way more of the client relationships than I did. We've already lost some clients. I'm not paying you full price for a business when we've already lost some clients. And they went back and forth and back and forth. And what ended up happening, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to go across the street, start my own company, and I'm going to call all these clients that I know, and they're going to go with me instead of whoever you find on the street to buy the company for pennies on the dollar. So again, just really important to you never think it's going to happen to you, but I mean, if you're listening to this, you've hopefully heard enough from Tom about the importance of planning. This is just one more step of planning.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I like to, you got the stick and the carrot. That was the stick section of the episode. And the carrot section is awesome because it gives you this lightness and this empowerment. If you proactively address this, it's a really positive thing for your business potentially. Like you said, folks with that bring on new owners thrive in their businesses in many cases. And the alternative path is you pass away and leave a mess for your spouse to hopefully figure out.
You've put so much work into this business. It's worth something. Like you deserve to harvest the value of that equity you've created. You deserve this.
Awesome. I think we have some great takeaways from the show. First and foremost, start today for any business owner. Really start the journey today. If you haven't already, don't feel anxiety about it and let that anxiety stop you from moving forward. Just start today. Get the process going. I tell that with
if you have an old continuity plan, go dust it off.
Clean it up. Yep. Spend that time. If it's been a year or 2 years or 3 years, dust it off and make sure it's still current. And then, start by, if you don't have a partner, start identifying those partners internally, externally, take those initial steps and, then work with a qualified individual to build the legal and governance infrastructure, the right type of attorney to help get all that in place, or just partner. And then when it comes to valuations, seek out orgs and professional designations and areas that might align with your niche industry to kind of help with that journey as well. Don't just use, tablecloth, word of mouth multiples that make you feel really good. Seek out reality with an expert in your space. So really good stuff, Scott. I really appreciate your expertise and experience. It's been an amazing asset for this show.
I enjoyed it, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of the Sandwich Bread Podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Sandwich Bread Pod is hosted by me, Tom Kaminsky. Huge thank you to Lauren Nose, our executive producer, for making this show happen, and to Andrew Maxon of Celebrator Creative Studios for branding and design. And lastly, to Audionautics for our theme music. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us, share with us your story, and maybe we'll find a way to work you into our podcast. Reach out to us at sandwichbreadpod@twinrobins.com or simply hello@twinrobins.com, TWINROBINS.com. We value that very much. Thanks so much again for listening. The information discussed in this podcast is only for general explanations and education. It is not specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Before acting on anything you heard here, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor. Past performance of any investment discussed in this show does not guarantee future results. Twin Robins Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the states of Missouri, Kansas, Georgia, Indiana, Virginia, and in all other jurisdictions where exempt. Registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training.
This is a Twin Robins production.
I think we nailed it.